Today I'm going to briefly talk about the virtues of this piece of equipment, the trap bar or hex bar or whatever name it will typically go by, trap being like trapezoidal, due to the shape in which the frame of the bar is designed in. It's not a trapezoid, obviously. It is more of a hexagon, but goes by both names. This bar in particular is made by Wright Equipment, Wright as in Wright Brothers, WRIGT. It's a 60-pound bar, roughly. It's made out of black pipe, like a lot of the other kind of homegrown strength equipment typically is, as opposed to like solid sleeves. It's a hollow black pipe, schedule 40 or 80, whichever one it is, can't remember. Roughly 2 inches in outside diameter, not quite the same. That's why you see over on that far plate that I use as a stop, a pair of the lock jaws that are built for these types of bars. They're like 1.9 inch or whatever bars. This bar in particular, one of the big drawbacks I have for it is that the grips are about 34 millimeters. So it's a bit more to grip. Conversely, it also means you work your grip more while you're working out. So it's a benefit and a distractor, or detractor rather, the fact that you will have your hands a little bit more open on this particular barbell. Rogue makes a barbell that's very similar. I haven't used that barbell. The design is nearly identical. There's no high handles on this bar. I would not use a high handle trap bar. I kind of don't agree with that mentality because I want to still be picking stuff up from roughly 9 inches of height off the floor, fairly consistent with a typical barbell. I think the extra handle height starts to really impact the usefulness of the exercise because you're not getting the benefit of range of motion. And again, range of motion trumps most everything else. You'll notice on this bar welds. I'll zoom in. The welds are a little, well, they leave a little bit left. There's a little bit left to be desired. I guess can't say the phrase right now, but it could be better, basically. But they are serviceable. I've had this bar for several years. I want to say roughly 2018. I bought this bar relatively cheap, somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 bucks, maybe 185 bucks, when the armed forces changed their physical fitness routines to include trap bar work. A bunch of manufacturers jumped on that wagon, and at that point in time, there was a ton of inventory that was coming available at a relatively inexpensive price. The nice thing about Wright Equipment, it is made in the United States. It was shipped out quickly, packaged well enough, came to my doorstep with no noticeable damage. I mean, it had maybe a couple of scrapes or something on it, but again, this trap bar has been here since 2018, 2019, somewhere in that time frame, I believe. Could be a couple other things. It does nick up my bumpers a little bit. Again, they should be cleaned up some of the welds, and there's a couple burrs on some of the metal plates holding it together. But nonetheless, decent trap bar. Overall, I think trap bars are very, very useful. I'll talk to that in a minute. The other thing to note on this trap bar is you can see with the handle offset there where it comes from the frame, and then there's roughly about another 6 to 8 inches, probably 8 to 9 inches between where the frame joins together and pinches to that pipe. That allows you to rack this barbell. So if I were to have hooks on the front of my cage, I could place this barbell in those hooks and unrack it from the cage itself. I don't do that. However, I do have the option. The other nice thing about this as well, with that width of the frame, is that I can take it inside of the rack and on the safeties, have it sitting on the safeties and do shrugs off the safeties or rack pulls. it allows me a little bit extra flexibility that a lot of the typical cheaper hex slash trap bars don't have, especially those ones from like Cap. They are significantly more narrow rather, and don't allow you to rack them in a rack. You would be racking the sleeves themselves as opposed to part of the frame. So with that being said, I'm going to move into doing some work. I will comment using this very lightweight on some of the added benefits that I see using a trap bar. So, the trap bar. Most trap bars are like this one where they're a closed frame. There are many open frame options on the market. Those are quite nice. I've been too cheap to buy one and not motivated to buy one since I don't see the added utility versus the cost to buy one. And I can get around doing other things. I do admit that the open frame allows for lunges and step ups and things that the closed frame doesn't allow. Those would be nice, but again, they're not necessary. So anyhow, you are inside of this thing. Like a barbell, where when you do the lift, the barbell comes in contact with your legs, so your legs start to stabilize the motion. In a trap bar, there is no stabilization, so you do have kind of two dimensions of freedom there. You've got side to side and forward back. Some people say it's a bad thing. However, that means you have to stabilize side to side and forward to back. Stabilizing your range of motion requires musculature. So, thus, it should follow that having an exercise where you need to stabilize both side to side laterally and forward back transversely, it should conclude that you use more muscle mass, and I believe that to be the case. I also believe that to be the case why typically trap bar affords a little bit more weight on the bar because you actually do get to use more musculature in the lift, in addition to being in a better angle of attack in the beginning of the lift. Barbell allows you to, the trap bar rather, allows you to get a little bit farther forward, get the barbell centered a little bit more over your center of mass, and I believe that gives you a bit more of a mechanical advantage in the lift. So, again, things I think are benefits. It requires a little bit more stability, which requires more musculature. It also allows a little bit better angle of attack or mechanical advantage at the beginning of the lift. So with those two things, I think it makes it slightly better than a barbell. I think the main reason why the barbell, the typical straight barbell, is the standard for deadlifts is because, one, most gyms have a standard barbell. Two, it's what's used in all the powerlifting organizations because they have just been an extension of the old weightlifting competitions, which used a standard barbell because that was the easiest implement to load and get overhead. Trap bar didn't exist. You can't really get it overhead. There's some other things going on. Gyms don't want to stock extra equipment when they don't need to, although a lot of gyms do have trap bars nowadays. So a lot of the reason why people say barbell is superior to a trap bar, I think is really just tradition more than anything else. If we're just looking for utility and versatility and doing lifts, I think that the trap bar possibly might be better, especially considering the newer open trap bar options that are available. And I will add to that, the other nice thing about the open trap bars is that many of them have their own kind of built-in jack where on the open side, you basically pull it up onto the frame there. That gets the weights themselves, the plates up off the ground, so you can do your unloading and loading of plates relatively easy. And it's pretty nice because loading and unloading the deadlift, as most anyone who's trained, it sucks. It's the worst thing to deal with when training the deadlift is coming in, sliding the plates on and off the bar, lifting the bar up, tucking things under, using a wedge, or however you want to do it. It's just not the best. As opposed to if you have a built-in kind of deadlift jack, pop it up, take the plates on and off, that's pretty nice. So, a bunch of blathering about, kind of a little bit more about the trap bar and why I think it's useful. So, the other thing, right, is that you can only stand so wide in a trap bar, but for probably 99.999% of the human population, the width of which the handles are placed on most of these trap bars is going to be wider than the human shoulders. So most people will be able to stack their ankles pretty easily underneath their shoulders. It does mean that your arms are pitched a little bit wide. That's one of the trade-offs there of having enough width inside of the frame to stand, is that the handles are going to not be exactly at your side, so that you're going to lose a little bit of mechanical advantage there. That puts you a little bit lower than typical deadlift. That's okay. So, I mentioned before, the grips on this particular trap bar, not the greatest. In addition to them being 34 millimeter, which is a relatively large diameter, the knurling is a little soft. So I will usually chalk up in later sets to get a little more grip. That being said, I'll go through and I'll just demonstrate setting up. So again, trap bar, you're gonna stand in a fairly normal stance, roughly with your ankles directly underneath your shoulders. When the trap bar comes to rest for me, it'll typically be sitting like this because I'm in a garage. The garage has a slight bead to it, so the bar will roll back and the frame will tip up. So what I do is then I go a step in, I will pull the frame forward. Sometimes I will tip it up, or sometimes I'll tip it up during the grip process. The one important thing to do is to make sure you line your wrists, the middle of your wrist, with the center line of the loading pin that comes in here. So you want to make sure that that is lined up on both sides. Take your grip. Then the next thing I do, while this thing is still tilted forward, is I kind of sit up my hands and my knees at the same time. So everything comes down and I start to get in a position. Sometimes you'll see what I'm doing here, which is adjusting my heels a little bit because my toe width is fine, but sometimes I'm a little bit tight at the heels. Again, I bring that down, get my knees as far forward as possible, and up. Relatively easy. And that's it. Not much to it other than that. It's a simple lift. Great thing about deadlifts is you're involving all the musculature from your ankle through the hips, up through the torso, pretty much everything except for maybe some of your anterior chest muscles and the triceps. Even then, your triceps are getting some sort of work because I'm trying to keep your arm from pulling apart literally. So that's the walkthrough. Hopefully it makes sense. Hopefully one or two people out there in the universe find this useful. I'm just doing it because why not? Kill a little bit of time. Provide some insight as to the many years I've been training and why I've come to some of the conclusions I've come to and why I use some of the tools that I use. Real quick here, Yeah, this is the log jaw for the axle bars, right? So well worn out, but axle 1.9 inch. Again, these being the Schedule 40 steel pipe sleeves. They're a little bit smaller than typical Olympic sleeves, so you'll have to use these types of collars, but they're relatively inexpensive in the grand scheme of things if you're buying your own equipment. I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to go through my setup silently, but a little bit slower on this second warm-up set. And then the second thing I'm going to do is correct something I said in the last little tidbit longitudinally. Side to side lateral movement and longitudinal movement, or transverse and side and longitudinal. So you have to stabilize in those two directions, longitudinally, transversely, or laterally. So again, that's why I think it's key, or the other thing has a large benefit to the typical barbell, because again, barbell is relatively stabilized. We start on the shins, kind of dragging up our legs as we're doing so. We are stabilizing that barbell longitudinally, whereas the trap bar doesn't have that. All right, so I'm gonna go through my setup again. I'm not gonna talk to it. I will go through it slowly. Hopefully you see the steps, and then it's kind of how I do it. Doesn't mean that's how anyone else should do it. It's just what I've done in order to make sure that I set up, get tight, get my hands, everything in the right position, and then pull with the best mechanical efficiency I can. So usually this guy's tucked off in the corner somewhere. This is not coffee. This is chalk. Had this chalk for many years. Since it's a garage gym or a home gym, I'm the only person using it. So it doesn't get a lot of use, and these bars of chalk have lasted a long time. You can see there's a little bit more weight on the bar now. That is 330 pounds. So I want a little bit better grip. I'll try my hands up some here. We'll see how it goes. Also close the garage door because it's starting to get warm out. And also it's blowing out the camera. So the video will be a little bit better, a little bit more even light consistency. All right, so chalked hands, good to have chalk. The knurling on this trap bar sucks, so it helps with that. And again, you'll see me go through the whole process, setting up, getting ready to pull, and pulling. All right, so this is take 2 talking to sumos. As you can see, I now have a standard barbell out on the platform. I have a few standard barbells. I have 3. I have this B&R bar by Rogue, and I have a Ohio Power Bar by Rogue, and I've got a very cheap, likely Chinese-made barbell that I bought like 20-ish, 25 years ago. The Rogue barbells I bought 10 years ago. Back when you get a lot of this stuff cheap, they're both well under $300 there. Well under $300 back then. You can see I've got some OSO barbell company collars before they were bought by Rogue. These also about 10 years old. I bought them the same time as the barbells, so roughly 2015. So on Fridays when I do deadlifts, I usually do both the trap bar and then the sumo. Do the sumo because it is a variant. It's good enough in terms of difference that I feel a nice change in the musculature I'm using. There's a change in ROM, slightly less at some joints, slightly more at others, and then more use of the adductor inside of the thigh, it feels like, at least to me. I make note of where I grip the barbell and where the barbell comes in contact with my shins. I've got points of reference. This being the second set, I can tell you for sure, the first set I pulled with these 3 fingers on both hands on the smooth of the barbell with only my pinkies on the knurling of this particular barbell, because that changes barbell to barbell. This being a B&R bar has 2 sets of rings. It has the powerlifting rings and it has the weightlifting rings. Typically my shins are set up so that where my shin is coming in contact with the barbell, that is on the innermost ring. I think that's the powerlifting ring. So yeah, I use those as points of departure from my own training, knowing that, okay, if things are not feeling right, there's an injury, how can I alter, how can I change the range of motion, and then just making sure I have consistency in my training. That's why I make note of where hands are, where feet are, where things come in contact, how everything lines up. So I encourage most people when training to make mental notes of those things. Find those comfortable positions while you're doing sit-up and then try to maintain those. And then if things get uncomfortable, then vary from that point and again, make notes of it. It's not to kill your training through some sort of analysis. Rather, it's just to make sure that you're mentally focused on what you're doing. Because I wouldn't say to use those things to infer much other than, do I feel good today? Does the setup feel right? Do I feel like I'm pulling consistent reps? That's about it. But again, consistency being key in general for training. If you are consistent in training and consistently avoiding injury, you'll get consistent gains. You'll maintain a good amount of muscle, good amount of baseline health, all the stuff that you're training for anyhow. All right, so I'm gonna set this up. I'm gonna pull a set of 5. My second set of 5 should look light. And again, notice it's gonna be a different angle at the knee, different angle at the hip, and then just how the lift comes together.